Greetings, Marvelers and Marvelettes. It's Napalm Dawn on G for G. Today we're doing another video in the Roots series where we compare new characters released in games to the older versions of themselves, discuss their power levels, and generally run a comparison between what we think of the newer versions of the characters and their old versions. Since we always draw this back to the roots of Marvel Avengers Alliance, you will see Marvel Avengers Alliance Redux used in this video. It's on the screen now. However, because this is not a video about Redux, I'm not going to be entertaining any questions about Redux down in the comments, so don't bother asking about it. Don't ask for status. None of that. If you want to find out what's going on with Redux, you can simply check out my channel, and one of the most recent videos uploaded gives a status on the project. Go to that video, and don't even bother asking anything in the comments of this one. So, if we take a look at Marvel Strike Force, we will see that there are two new Hero Asgardians in the game. It currently bumps up the Asgardian roster to 7. However, the Hero Asgardian roster caps out at a team of 5, basically stranding Loki and Hela on their own. It's going to be kind of interesting to see if they have something planned for Hela and Loki, as they are villain Asgardian, because right now you can make a team out of Mighty Thor, Valkyrie, Sif, and Heimdall. By the way, I've always hated Sif's little portrait in this game. It's so clownish. Anyway, Mighty Thor and Valkyrie have been added to the game, sometimes referred to as Jane Thor, J Thor, Titty Thor, or Jane Foster, and Valkyrie obviously is always retained as Valkyrie. There was a little bit of controversy with Valkyrie back when she was introduced in Thor Ragnarok, as people were saying, oh, that's not Valkyrie, that can't be Valkyrie, blah blah blah. However, if you paid attention to some of the flashback sequences in that movie, she was basically called a Valkyrie, not the Valkyrie, and the Valkyrie was actually seen dying in one of the flashbacks. So let's get into it. So we're going to start with what I call the weaker of the two, and that is the Mighty Jane Foster. Most of the Asgardians within Marvel Avengers Alliance did pretty well. They all generally had some point in which they were no pun intended, a worthy character that actually did relatively good things in the game, had their points in which they did well in PvP, and also had some pretty good PvE usage. However, I've always found J Thor, or Jane Foster, to be not particularly anywhere in the game. She didn't really show up in PvP. She didn't really have a reasonable slot in PvE. One of the only characters that compares to her weakness on the Asgardians was Sif, but Sif was at a time in which she existed in the early game, and later on, with certain weapons, her slashing attacks could work pretty well on bleed teams. But for the most part, Jane Foster came so late in the game. She wasn't particularly used and was not really that strong in PvP, but as we will dig down in the comments on the Avengers Wiki, we'll see that some people were able to do pretty right by her. So the Asgardians in the original game was Angela, BRB, Beta Ray Bill, Thors, Destroyer, Enchantress, Heimdall, Loki, Sif, Thor, Jane Foster, and Valkyrie. Thor, of course, did pretty well early game, and his uniforms kept him somewhat up to date. Loki was considered trash when he first dropped, but when we got E-ISOs and A-ISOs later in the game, Loki was actually pretty threatening if you kitted him outright. You can check my channel for a video on Team Trolley Nuts, which was Loki and Scarlet Witch, and you can see just exactly what you can do with Loki. Destroyer worked very well with energy teams. Destroyer and Carolina Dean was actually a pretty nice combo. Beta Ray Bill, of course, was extremely popular in PvP, especially because he was a bruiser and could use the escutcheon ISO. A little moment of trivia for you. Beta Ray Bill plus Electro was Team Crasher game. You may remember there was a PvP season where if a agent equipped certain weapons and used Beta Ray Bill and used Electro and put that team on defense, well then your team, if you attacked them, would crash. So it was a very cheap win for the defense, and of course Playdom did stop it, but it took a little while for that to happen. Enchantress, we know, was extremely strong in PvP, pairing off very well with the likes of Red Hulk and Pesty. Angela, not so much. Still a little bit stronger than Jane Foster, but didn't really show up much at all. Heimdall, of course, was used pretty well in PvP for rising up and stopping people with stealth. And Valkyrie existed at a time in the game that was pretty close to the beginning, and she had her own things that made her strong and a bit of a nuisance. We'll talk about that when we get to Valkyrie. And of course, the Warriors 3 was all over in PvP when they were first released. Fandral and Volstagg usually teamed up with an agent running the Tinkered, and Hogun was a absolute murder unit in PvE when used with people like Union Jack, Rocket Raccoon, and Spider-Man Noir, or Spino. So let's go and talk about Jane. So Jane came in as a scrapper with Asgardian benefits. She had a passive of charging energy where she gains an increasing damage buff whenever electric attack is used, but she consumes it when she performs an attack. She had a passive of static pull, chance to interrupt attacks made by enemies with static charge. She had an ISO that allowed her to start off with all stacks, which changed her gameplay quite a bit. And she also had an ISO that added a quick action to Asgardian Strike, which gave everybody rising up, and all allies gained Crackling Shield, where it deals electricity to melee attackers, sort of like a Shaman's Lightning Shield in World of Warcraft. So she did Hammer Throw, which was ranged electric, Asgardian Strike, which was melee, and if you made it a quick action, you would not gain the Scrapper benefit, so that was a risk. Shocking Slam, ranged electric, and Home Run, which was melee. A lot of her stuff had cooldowns, which made her a major pain in the ass to use. Asgardian Strike at 2, Shocking Slam at 3, Home Run at 2. Shocking Slam is the one where you were supposed to dump her energy stacks and do quite a bit of AoE damage. So, yeah, her playstyle was a little bit weird. Looking at her in game, of course, she looked like this: Hammer Throw, Asgardian Strike, Shocking Slam, Home Run. This is her kind of classic comic look, because clearly, you know, the movie was not out at the time. She just really was nowhere. She didn't really have anything going on for her in the game. As you can see down here in the comments, a lot of people were like, is she any good? I can't really get her there. I can't get the damage out. Some people were making the mistake about the quick action not getting the Scrapper benefits. Aggressive ISO is horrible for her. She's a liability. You'll see Sinister S, which never really, this guy never really gave that much great advice. I remember back when the forums were active, I never liked Sinister S's advice. Iron Frank usually had some good questions. Here he's saying that she gets better, leveled up. Kim Jo's asking if she's weak. PKB comes in and talks about the PKB method for himself, because Kakami was saying, you know, should I go with the PKB method for her? And Sinister S again gives bad advice and says ISO 8 is only important in PvE. I find that to be fucking ridiculous. But here's Enemy from Hell saying her skill set is weird. Again, not a particularly strong character. If we look at her in Marvel Strike Force, She has Hammer Slammer, Shards of Mjolnir, which definitely comes from the movie. As you can see, Mjolnir in her possession is cracked, just like it was in the movie. She wears the movie outfit, although the helmet is very classic. Hammer Slammer does a lot of damage, clears positive effects, and is piercing. Probably a good candidate to go and have Striker. Striker says that she gets an additional attack when she attacks vulnerable enemies. So 2 hits of 220% damage with piercing, clearing positive effects is very good because you could clear up to 4 if they're vulnerable. Shards of Mjolnir attacks everybody for piercing damage on the primary target, and then AoE Splash for 180% piercing, reducing speed bar if they're stunned. If their primary target does not have stun, then apply Disruptive, which is also extremely good. Ride the Lightning. Nice little Metallica reference there, after Stranger Things has been referencing Metallica quite a bit recently. She attacks all enemies again for piercing. She flips positives into negatives. She gains charged. And then Goddess of Thunder is her passive. If at the end of any turn this character has 5 or more charged, attack the enemy with the highest damage that does not have trauma and lose all her charged, and then she applies trauma. She heals herself based on non-minion Asgardians, so she does work with villain Asgardians. But if there are hero Asgardians, she has a chance to apply 1 charge to self and all chargeable heroes Guardian allies. So she's a nice little battery for Thor, and progressing his abilities a little bit quicker. So now let's go ahead and move on to Valkyrie. And of course we'll pop into Marvel Future Fight, and technically we can also pop into Marvel Avengers when we talk about Thor over here, because she is in that game. So Valkyrie is represented as the original comic Valkyrie in Marvel Avengers Alliance. When Redux fully drops and we begin to go through the content that the development team has created, we will get Valkyrie Ray in Life, and it will be the MCU version of Valkyrie. So as you can see, she's Asgardian. She has a passive of Escort of Souls, gains health when an ally is KO'd or saved by her Death Watch. She is a Shield Maiden, protects allies that are low health from single target attacks, will not protect targets with Death Watch, will not protect if she is low on her health herself. So she kind of is a little bit like Cecil from Final Fantasy IV. She was reasonable health, very poor stamina, very good attack and defense, reasonable accuracy and evasion. So if you use the PKB method, you would be favoring her defense over her evasion, accuracy for crit, so on and so forth. She had Gear, a desperation attack that exploits exposure, Dragonfang, which is an absolute classic, magic, slashing, melee, and electric. That is a lot of categories. And this is why that is very big. Nearby electric attacks may chain to this target, causing extra damage. That was key in the later game when more ISOs were available. It was a charged attack, which triggers static charge when used. Sacrificial Blessing, where she gains sacrifice. It reduces her health by 25%. This cannot reduce her below 5. And when she reduced her health like that, other allies gained Death Watch, and she herself gained Death Watch. This was her restoration ability. This was a big key. More on this in a moment. She also had Flight of the Valkyrie, which summoned the Pegasi. All enemies got off balance and exposed, and because it was a summon attack, there was an ISO later in the game that would make this a quick action, which is really nice. And you'll notice her cooldowns, unlike Thor, are balanced. She has none except for Sacrificial Blessing, which would make sense. She had an ISO that was Champion of the Slain, where she would increase accuracy, attack, defense, and evasion when an ally is KO'd. She also had the Valhallan Augmented ISO 8, which says Sacrificial Blessing has a 100% chance to apply Death Watch and becomes a quick action. So, in one round, technically you could do two things. You could do Flight of the Valkyrie and Sacrificial Blessing, which is pretty solid. Why she was... so let's... As a Chronaldo, since she paired up well with Black Knight, I would agree. Especially because Black Knight would cause her Dragonfang to not only be melee and electric and magic, but it would also be... It would cause bleeds, because that's what Black Knight does to slashing. The same thing for her polearm attack. So she would pair very well with Black Knight. So she was pretty big in PvP in the beginning of the game at the time that she was around. The reason being is anybody who could cause resurrections or prevent death was always very big in PvP. You had Cyclops with Don't Die On Me Man, you had Angel, you had Phoenix, and you had Valkyrie. Now, I played with her on my streams quite a bit because we were always testing the suicide teams where the agent would kill himself and cause a banish on the enemy team with the corned beef, aka the Phoebe Denrock, and then use the phylactery to resurrect. We tried every character who had a resurrect to see if Phoenix or Angel or Valkyrie could pull the agent out of the dirt after suiciding, but I guess using the Catholic religion, suicide is a terrible, terrible sin, so generally the agent was not resurrectable by any means unless you use the phylactery, which broke the game. The phylactery was the only thing that allowed resurrection under circumstances where you cheated the game a little bit. But that aside, Valkyrie was pretty strong in the beginning of the game, and actually if you applied her ISOs later on, she was pretty strong. So taking a look at her here, you can see we go all the way back to some of the original early characters of the game to find her, kind of the opposite of Thor. We find her here on page 6. Here is her classic representation with the Madonna cone tits look. And now taking a look at her here in Marvel Strike Force. Tell me that really doesn't kind of look like Shuri. It looks more like Shuri than Tessa Thompson, to be honest. Let me add Wakandans over here, just because I haven't really compared yet, but a little bit. I'd say honestly it's closer to Shuri than it is Tessa Thompson's representation of her within the MCU. Yeah, close. So she has Rising Cut, which is a primary attack for damage, and then a bonus attack if the primary target has Death Proof. Each attack deals additional damage, she applies bleeds, and then she transfers the Death Proof. So you can kind of see that sacrifice thing happening here, that kind of continuation of Death Watch from Marvel Avengers Alliance. Here we have Valkyrie's Charge. She applies counter defense up for 2 turns and offense up for 2 turns to herself and all Hero Asgardians. She attacks a primary target. If they have Death Proof, it deals additional damage. DRAGONFANG'S Bite, so we once again see a reference to Dragonfang, just like we did over here. It's her sword. Attack the primary target for damage. If they have Death Proof, it deals additional damage. If the character has charged, she rebounds to an adjacent enemy, part 2 charged on the character. If the target has Death Proof, it deals additional damage, and then she loses all charged. So again, she is a good recipient of Thor being a battery. So it really makes sense to get rid of Loki and Hela and get Valkyrie and Thor on your Asgardian team. Although again, I don't really know where that's going to leave Loki and Hela. And she has a passive of Battle Maiden, which was one of her passives over here in Marvel Avengers Alliance. She heals herself, and she heals max health of Asgardian allies. When this character or a hero Asgardian dies, 50% chance to perform the following actions on herself and all hero Asgardians. Clear negative effects, generate ability energy, heal for 20%, and then lose all charged. No resurrection, however. Let's see if at the orange level that she does. When this character or hero Asgardian ally dies, apply Safeguard and apply the following positive effects: immunity, offense up, defense up. So, kind of, sort of, there is that extreme ties to death, like we saw with Marvel Avengers Alliance, and most of the application is the same, with the exception that she is not doing any kind of a resurrection in Marvel Strike Force. So they're close. We see the reference to Dragonfang coming through. We see the Battle Maiden passive coming through, although slightly different. No reference to her polearm, because we know that in the MCU she is not using it. So let's take a look at their representations in Future Fight. So as we do this, who remembers the times in which the Warriors 3 were so good in Marvel Avengers Alliance PvP? The Tankard actually was nerfed because of that. You could use the Tankard with other characters. You wouldn't get some of the buffs out of it. You would get some of them. Let's see. Tankard. No, not that. Asgardian Tankard. There it is. Okay, so you became an honorary member of the Warriors 3. All other Warriors 3 drink and gain their effects when used. Aegir's finest. All allied warriors gain competence, giving them their class buffs. Elixir of recovery. Remove debuffs while fed. Originally, everybody got this competence. They don't list patches on this, unfortunately, but this was actually nerfed at one point in time, that you could do triple Tankard tactician teams, and you could always get your tactician buff. Alright, so over here we're going to take a look at them in Marvel Future Fight. There's Beta Ray Bill over there. Does pretty well in this game. He actually does pretty well in Marvel Duel also. Here's Valkyrie. Here's her original MCU representation of her towards the end of Thor's Ragnarok. She's got a uniform that converts her to the original Valkyrie. And you can see she has Dragonfang and gear with her. So this one didn't reverse. They started with MCU and then they went backwards to what a lot of people call the Valkyrie. Toned down the Madonna cone tits there a little bit. And then we have the newest incarnation of Valkyrie as she is in Love and Thunder. I'm not... Oh, and yep, see, there's the daggers on the boots. Does anybody, if you've seen the movie, did anybody think they were Loki's daggers that she used? When I saw them in the movie and she would pull them out of her boots, I'm like, that kind of makes me think they're Loki's daggers. She has a Shield Maiden passive, and this is where Valkyrie is very good in Marvel Future Fight. You put her on your team even if you don't use her, and she gives you increased damage to supervillains, which is good for world bosses, and she decreases the damage received by supervillains. So having Valkyrie on your team is good even if you don't actually use her. Sharp Chivalry, Aragorn's Leap, Step of the Goddess, Aura Sword, Army of the Valkyrie, Leader of the Valkyrie, Valhalla's Defender, which is her tier 3, and Sight of Soul. So she has pretty good uniforms. The newest one really gives her quite a lot of buffs, where she gets a dodge rate up by 30%, skill damage by 30%, bonus damage by 30%, decreases basic damage received. I would think that that makes her pretty solid and might actually be able to crawl out of just being in a buff spot. If you turn the AI on and you hold her level 3 ability, what she does is she waits. Now they should be attacking me. There we go. She counterattacks the moment she takes damage, which is pretty solid. And here is her tier 3, where she summons Sif and Heimdall, and they all jump in for a over nearly 500 hit combo. There's the Flight of the Pegasi and a little bit of a reference to the Bifrost. Here you can see she uses Dragonfang, or it actually kind of looks like the Necro Sword a little bit, but it is the Dragonfang. So she might actually be able to crawl out of being just a buffer. Jane Thor, on the other hand, has yet another game in where she just appears weak. But let's look at her uniforms first. So here's her classic representation based on the comics. And here is her MCU representation based on Natalie Portman. She sort of looks shorter, even though she's not. In this, you can see MJOLNIR is cracked rather than being full. And when we preview her skills, you know, typical for MJOLNIR, lots of hammer spinning, electric. We've got a little bit of a flight move on this one. What's interesting is that her representation in Marvel's Avengers as a sort of kin to Thor being Ryu, when you read about her in Marvel's Avengers, they say, oh, you know, she's not just basically another Thor, she's extremely close to it, but she's considered more skilled in the ranged attacks of MJOLNIR than even Thor. And that sort of reminds me of the fact that Silk was always referenced as being a better web spinner than Spider-Man. I thought that was kind of a neat little touch, that they're trying to differentiate the two a little bit. You know, with Silk, they were like, okay, she spins webs better than Spider-Man. You kind of think that's hard to do, but that's what the claim was. And for J-Thor, they're saying that she's in some ways more innately tuned with MJOLNIR and therefore able to wield MJOLNIR at range as a throwing weapon a little bit better. Whether that's true in the comics or not, I don't particularly know. But we have Thor's Advance, which does shock damage and lightning damage. Hammer Boomerang, which is a stun. This uniform really jacks J-Thor up. Her default incarnation, she's just bad. None of her abilities really do anything. They're all just basic melee filler. But now she gains a stun, MJOLNIR Storm, where she does shock damage and she accumulates true damage. Thunder Raid, stun, paralysis, hit point recovery, immunity. If you want to use J-Thor in this game, you have to get this uniform. There is absolutely no doubt about it. Her original is just simply trash. So right now, where I would give the power to J-Thor, I would give it to Marvel Strike Force. She acts as a very good giant D-cell battery for the rest of the Hero Asgardian team, especially herself, Thor, and Valkyrie. For Valkyrie, I would have to give her strongest point, honestly, to be Marvel Future Fight. because she is such a massive buffer to any teams that are fighting villains. Especially good for doing the world bosses like the Black Order and everything. Having Valkyrie be on your team, simply waiting in the wings, she provides some good buffs. With her uniform, I think she could potentially even get strong enough to be a active character. So I'm going to go ahead and pause the video for just a moment. We'll load up Marvel's Avengers and finish off looking at Thor over in that game. Alright, so we are back and we're taking a look towards the end of the video here at Thor over in Marvel's Avengers. So her default outfit looks like this. It's called her Iconic. One of the few times you ever see her represented as having hair out. She's almost always got the helmet. She has the Mighty Thor Jane Foster outfit, which is her typical comic representation. She has these Valkyrie related ones where the hammer changes drastically. I've seen this hammer before on some other Asgardian characters, these gold looking one. I forget who I've seen it on. It wasn't Beta Ray Bill, although his was kind of small too. I forget, but that hammer representation we've seen before. This golden one kind of almost makes her look like Wonder Woman to a certain degree. And then we have Storm's Eye, which is a variant of the default. I like it. It is a little bit more simplistic, but it has more contrast. It limits the colors, but the way the gold and the black and the gray pop on each other is really good. And then she has these two Nordic ones that almost make her look like Black Widow cosplaying as Thor. Sort of has a God of War Ragnarok vibe to it. Like, you can imagine that being in that game. If we were to take a look at her skills, you will see that her skill tree is, of course, very, very similar to Thor. She plays very much like him, but there are some small differences. The reason why she's in the game is originally when Square was talking about this game, they said, okay, you can only have one of each character when you do multiple player missions on the field at a time. So one Iron Man, one Hulk, one Captain America, etc. They have since gone back on that and changed it slightly so that in a lot of the modes you can have multiples of characters. As a matter of fact, this Black Widow Red Room event is where that had originally started. So now it's a little less important to have these Ryu or Ryu/Ken type characters, or sort of the palette swaps of Scorpion and Sub-Zero in Mortal Kombat, because now you can have 4 Iron Men, you can have 4 Thors, you can have 4 Hulks if you wanted to. Square is still kind of sticking with releasing their style variants. So for Iron Man, you would have a War Machine. Hulk, you would have a She-Hulk. Thor has Jane Foster. If we ever get around to Doctor Strange, there was going to be a Scarlet Witch. Here's an interesting thing I was thinking of. It's off topic for the video, but we all got upset when Spider-Man only came out on the PlayStation, right? He's a PlayStation exclusive, and of course fans of the game were like, man, but I play this on PC, I play this on Xbox, what am I gonna do? Well, here's how you can do it. Have Square release Venom and make Venom available on all systems, and now you can finally have your Spider-Man style play on multiple consoles, and that's how I think they can get it done. So she has a little bit more control over Mjolnir at range, but she pretty much plays just like him. She even has, if I can get away from people and stop getting attacked here, she even has the triple spin, where you hold it down, now. I gotta get away from these flyers a little bit here. Maybe I can ride on the other side of this. There we go. Alright, so spin, spin, AoE. Just like Thor. It's actually one of my favorite moves to do close range with people, as it does a tremendous amount of AoE. So she does play a lot the same, but a little bit different. It is free, so you may as well try her out. And if you're somebody who likes Thor, and I do, I think he's very melee heavy with just the right amount of ranged, similar to Black Panther. She's worth playing and leveling up if you're still actually playing Marvel Avengers, which not a lot of people are. So, hope you guys enjoyed the video and taking a look at the recent Hero Asgardians and comparing them to some other games. I believe in Marvel Heroes, Jane Foster was an alternative outfit for Thor, similar to the way female Black Panther, aka Shuri, was a alternate to Black Panther and not their own toons and everything. So, take care folks, catch you in the next video.